Right, so in this video we're going to talk about modeling and scaffolding in language teaching. These two words are really important for teachers to consider when they're teaching, and I think that teachers need to get into the habit of using modeling and also think about scaffolding when they are planning and organizing activities and so on. Okay, so here are some questions to think about first. What is scaffolding? Okay, what does scaffolding mean in language teaching? Next, what is modeling? And what can we model? Okay, so as a teacher, what should we be modeling? Okay, the final questions. Why are they important? Okay, why is scaffolding important and why is modeling important? Okay, and what are some examples of each? So, what are some examples of modeling? And what are some examples of scaffolding? Okay, now maybe you know the answers to these, okay? Maybe some of these you're not too sure about, that's fine. In this video we're going to cover the answers to these questions. And even if you have an understanding of modelling and scaffolding, I think it is good to really think about these and to kind of integrate them into the way we teach more clearly. Okay, so let's have a look at first the definition. So modelling means to show, okay? It basically means to show, or we can say to demonstrate as well. Okay, so one of the questions on the previous slide is what can we model? Okay, now I would suggest that in teaching, in language teaching, there are two main things that we can model. Okay, we can model or show activities. So we can show how to do an activity, for example. We can model the activity. We can also model language. Okay, so we can show examples, we can give examples, we can provide examples of language. Now, language is a big field, okay? So we can, for example, model pronunciation, we can model spelling, we can model how to use a word, we can model how to answer a question. There's lots of different aspects of modeling language, but essentially they're all modeling language. So yeah, when you're teaching, think about these two things. As a teacher, you should be modeling activities because you're setting up activities. You need to show students how activities are done. Okay, this could be making something or completing a worksheet, for example. You can also model language, okay, because as a language teacher, you are the model for the learners, okay? You are the person who can give the examples of language, for example, how to answer a question or pronunciation. Okay, so that's modeling, and remember there are two things we can model. The second one here is scaffolding. So what is scaffolding? Well, scaffolding is the support that we provide to learners. Essentially, scaffolding is support. Okay, we're going to look at more examples of these. So if you're still unclear, don't worry. Okay, but before we do that, let's have a look at it in terms of task sequencing. Okay, so when you're planning activities and lessons, one of the things you need to do is think about the steps, okay? Think about the steps of an activity and think about how you're going to set up activities. Okay, so let's look at task sequencing with some modeling and scaffolding. Here is a common sequence for an activity. This is actually the sequence of one of the activities I use as an icebreaker. For now, that's not important. Let's just have a look at the steps of the activity. Okay, so first the teacher explains what we're going to do. Okay, explains the task. And then number two, teacher models the activity with the students. So the teacher does the activity with the students together. Number three, students do the activity. Okay, so teacher models and then the students do the activity. Have a look at the green triangle, and in the green triangle you can see the interaction patterns as well. Okay, now this activity actually has two stages. Okay, it's quite a nice idea actually when you're planning activities to think about different stages of the activity. Try to extend it, have like a second stage or a third stage as well. Okay, so this one does have a second stage, and in the next stage, number 4, the teacher introduces stage 2. And the teacher maybe models the language at this point. Number 5, students practice and prepare what they need to do to complete. And then number 6, students report to the class what they found out in the main activity, which is number 3. Okay, so that's the second stage. And notice it goes all the way from teacher starting all the way around to the students, and then back to the whole class, where students report to the whole class. So that's quite a good way of thinking about activities, this kind of circle from the teacher to the students and then back again. Okay, you can see in the triangle as well the interaction patterns also. Okay, so look at the Christmas tree pattern here. What does this represent? What does the triangle shape represent? Okay, well, I've given some clues with the interaction patterns. Well, there's a few different ways of thinking about this. One is that it could be, the triangles could represent student involvement. Okay, if you notice at the top part of the triangle, really the teacher is mostly involved in the lesson, but as we go down the triangle, more and more the students get involved. Okay, it could be the amount of communication that's happening. So at the beginning, really it's only the teacher communicating, but by the end, everybody gets a chance to communicate. It could also be amount of time. Okay, so at the beginning is a shorter amount of time, and going on and on is more amount of time. Okay, so those are some ideas about what the triangle shapes represents. Okay, but yeah, those example steps give you some ideas about how to scaffold, and also that you should include modeling. Okay, but let's have a look at this triangle idea a little bit more. Now, one of the ways to think about this triangle is in terms of responsibility. So who is responsible at this part of the lesson? Okay, so the key to student-centered teaching is getting the students involved. A good teacher does less work than the students at the end of an activity or lesson. Okay, so student-centered teaching should involve the students, okay, and activity should be designed so that later on in the activity the students have the responsibility for using the language. So you can see the triangles again here, but it starts with the teacher, more responsibility for the teacher. As the lesson goes on, the teacher gets less and less, and the students become more and more. Okay, so the responsibility is passed to the students, and this is because of scaffolding. Okay, the teacher needs to start by scaffolding, but then more and more you can get the students involved, and at different steps throughout the lesson the teacher should be modeling so that students can be prepared to get more involved. Okay, so here is a famous quote that I found. This is a famous quote related to this kind of thing, and in this quote I refers to the learner. Okay, so let's have a look at this. Tell me and I will forget. Show me and I will remember. Involve me and I will understand. Step back and I will act. Okay, so I is the learner. So you can see that it progressively gets better and better. Okay, so it starts with forgetting, remembering, understanding, and acting. So what can we learn from this quote? Well, telling and explaining is not enough. Okay, so telling and explaining probably means that students are going to forget, okay, because you're not getting them involved. Okay, next thing that we can learn is that showing or modeling is an important step. Okay, we need to model in order to move on to the later sentences. Also, we should plan activities to move towards learner independence. Okay, the activities should be designed to go from the teacher to the students, and that later on the students should have the responsibility for acting. So we should plan objectives from the learner's perspective. So when we're planning an objective for a lesson or an activity, the plan should be made from the learner's perspective. Okay, I have another video about writing student learning objectives. So yeah, there's more detail in another video. Okay, so you can see from this quote that telling is not enough. We should move on to modeling. Then we should involve the students, and then we should step back. Okay, there should be a point in the lesson where students are using the language and the teacher is just monitoring and listening and checking. Okay, but the students are responsible. Okay, right, so let's have a look at a little bit more about modeling and scaffolding now. So modeling means to show and to demonstrate. Here is an example of modeling language. Okay, so here is the warm-up discussion question. You can see at the bottom. What is your favorite kind of music and why? Okay, now imagine that I start a class, the topic is music, I want to get students talking. So I say, okay, right, let's get started. Today we're going to talk about music. What is your favorite kind of music and why? Talk with your partner. Go. Okay. Now, I've asked a question and I've asked the students to very quickly get involved, but I could do something before letting the students discuss this question. What could I do? Well, I could model how to answer this question. This is modeling language. Okay, so before I get the students discussing the question, I should model my response, my answer to the question. So here is the teacher modeling the answer. First, let me tell you my favorite music. I really like jazz because it helps me relax and focus when I study. I first heard it at high school. I like all types of jazz, old jazz and modern jazz. My favorite musicians are Miles Davis and John Coltrane. My favorite album is A Kind of Blue by Miles Davis. What about you? What's your favorite type of music? Discuss with your partner. Okay, so notice that there's a visual help as well. Notice that the teacher is modeling the answer first, and in this example, you could even have, for lower level students, they could read these sentences as well. So in this answer are lots of sentences that students can use. For example, my favorite musicians are, my favorite album is, I like jum jum jum. Okay, so there's lots of examples here that students can then use in their answers. Okay, I would suggest that, whenever you ask a question, the teacher should answer the question first, okay? Even if it's like a checking question or a worksheet, do the first one together, just so the teacher can model the example, okay? This is more important for lower level students, less important for higher level students, okay? Okay, let's move on. So, here is an example of modeling activities. We just looked at modeling language. Now let's look at modeling activities. So the teacher starts by showing some examples. The teacher can then ask checking questions to find out if students understand. When the students are ready, the teacher asks some students to come and help in front of the class. Further checking questions are asked. When students are ready, they are given individual worksheets to practice. Okay, so notice that the teacher models the activity, shows how to do the activity. In this example, in the picture, you can see punctuation and capital letters and so on. Okay, so important part of this is it starts with the teacher. The teacher starts to get students involved, coming to the front and helping the teacher, and then moves towards the students. Okay, so that modeling becomes part of that process. Okay, let's have a look at scaffolding then. So scaffolding is support. And there is actually kind of a literal meaning for scaffolding. So scaffolding in construction is the structure that is put around the building as the building goes up. Okay, so that's scaffolding in construction. Scaffolding in education, the concept is similar, but the meaning is a bit different. So scaffolding is the support that is provided, usually by the teacher. As the learner develops, this scaffolding can be taken away or placed at higher levels. Okay, so scaffolding in education is the support the teacher provides for the learner. Scaffolding in language teaching can include things such as talking simply and slowly for low-level students. You can simplify and slow your speech. Doing easy tasks before difficult tasks, so you can structure the tasks in a way that starts with the easy things. You can do mimes to help comprehension. For example, when you're telling a story, you can mime the story, mime some of the actions, and that will help learners to understand the story. You can show pictures, which is visual support, okay? And also you can pre-teach vocabulary before moving on to things like listening and reading activities or some kind of, language work or activity, okay? So having like a vocabulary step near the beginning of the lesson is a form of scaffolding. Okay, so those are some ideas for scaffolding in language teaching. Now, I do want to mention this because the way that I view scaffolding is quite different from the way that other people might view scaffolding in other fields. Okay, so this is a quick note. I believe that scaffolding is defined and viewed differently in different fields. For example, in child development, it is very much focused on parent-child social interactions. So in kind of the field of child development, scaffolding is more related to kind of social interactions, often between the parent and the child. Whereas in language teaching and TESOL materials development, it can include things like including a vocabulary step in an EFL lesson or providing example answers. Okay, so the way that I would view scaffolding is very practical in terms of language teaching. So things like lesson planning, things like developing materials, things like organizing the steps of an activity, those things can also be included in scaffolding, even if those things would not really be considered scaffolding in child development. So I just want to mention that the view of scaffolding depends on where you are and what position you're taking from this idea, from this concept. Okay, now final tips here that I want to share with you. Model language by giving examples is really important. It's usually better to focus on meaning. Okay, so when you're giving examples, I don't mean giving explicit examples like, look at this present perfect sentence, right? So when you're giving examples, you don't need to explicitly say, oh, here is the target language, okay? It's better to give examples in context, within a dialogue, within a story, with some pictures, for example. So the focus is kept on the meaning, not explicit grammar teaching, okay? A good way to model activities is by showing how to do them, okay? So modeling activities is kind of showing, like doing something or, showing how the thing is done, right? Okay, and the final tip here is plan lessons with scaffolding, okay? So scaffolding is kind of related to the steps of the lesson, if you're thinking about scaffolding in terms of language teaching. So, so plan the steps of your lesson with scaffolding. The amount of scaffolding and what you scaffold depends on the age and the level of the learner, okay? So the kind of the things that we scaffold and how we scaffold for young learners is going to be very different for scaffolding for high-level learners. For high-level learners, it might be things like warm-up questions, background knowledge, and so on. Okay. Okay, so those are my final tips for modeling and scaffolding. Now, you've probably thought about this quite a bit during this video about modeling and scaffolding. How are they related? Well, modeling is a form of scaffolding. Okay, so modeling is something we should do as part of our scaffolding. So that's how they are related. Okay, so I hope that was a useful video and it's given you some ideas about modeling and scaffolding. This is not an abstract concept. This is something that should become a part of your teaching, okay? So when you're teaching, your teaching technique, your skill of teaching should involve modeling and scaffolding. It's not an abstract kind of thing that we just learn in a textbook, okay? So I hope this helps you think about your teaching and it helps you to be a better teacher. Okay, thank you very much.